when anything potentially terrible happens to a comedian, we're like, how are we going to make this funny? Yeah. So I thought it was a joke. There was like, there's no way my dad's not my dad, so I'm going to find out what's up. But as a joke, I filmed it and I was like, I'm about to find out my family's not my family.
In this week's episode of the Psychology Podcast, I had a really interesting chat with Krystyna Hutchinson. Krystyna is an internationally touring stand-up comedian, actress, and writer based in New York City. Krystyna and her comedy partner, Corinne Fisher, co-host the critically acclaimed Guys We Fucked, the Anti Slut Shaming Podcast, in addition to co-writing the book Fucked, being sexually explorative and self-confident in a world that's screwed. This was a really enjoyable chat with a really interesting human. As you all know, I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy, and Krystyna has a huge interest in the field of psychology and is quite familiar with psychological theory on relationships. In this episode, we discussed her tumultuous childhood, her own struggles with mental health, and how she coped with a recent shock revelation she had about her life. We laughed, we cried. Without further ado, I bring you Krystyna Hutchinson. Hey everyone, welcome to the Psychology Podcast. This is going to be a new era where I wear this jacket and I bring more of my whole self to the table, and we have even more interesting and stimulating and maybe even a little edgy conversations that are relevant to everything going on in the world right now. But to kick us off, we have Krystyna Hutchinson. Woo!
Hello. I'm honored to be here as part of your pivot.
Yes. We're so glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you are many things.
So many.
Right? I mean, I can just start saying things like you're a comedian, you're a spiritual seeker.
Oh,
right?
Just
Is that fair?
Endless well of curiosity.
Yeah.
Yes, very
You're
fair.
a curiosity seeker, you're an adventurer, you co-host a podcast.
I do.
Guys, we fucked or we've?
We fucked, yeah.
We, W-A.
Guys, we fucked,
yeah.
Yep.
And then there's a subtitle to it as well, right? Like the Anti Slut Shaming Podcast.
Yes.
Is that the official subtitle of it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, why did you start that podcast?
So my comedy partner got dumped by someone at the time she thought was the love of her life in a Panera Bread. And that got her spinning emotionally and mentally. And in that spiral, she said to me one day, she's like, we should just do a podcast where we interview every guy we've ever fucked, and we'll just call it Guys We Fucked. I'm like, that's amazing. Yes.
Wait, hold on. Can I stop right there? So there's already an assumption that you'll have enough episodes to do that. So
right.
Yeah.
So and
she must have.
Our numbers are not that high.
Okay.
Honestly,
so you'd have to keep going then, I guess, too.
Yeah, we started branching out because we were like, this is a very vulnerable type of conversation. A conversation we probably wouldn't have had if we didn't have a podcast about it. But when we started, there was no video. So the people that weren't in the entertainment industry and had no reason to kind of promote their vulnerability, they were willing to do it because they could go under a fake name. Oh. But now with the video, it's all about video now. Yeah. So it's a little less, it's a little more vulnerable.
Yeah. So you started that, and then you were in. You liked that idea.
I loved it. Yeah.
You loved the idea, and it's done really well. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I'm very proud of it.
Why do you think it has done so well? What do you think what nerve does it strike?
The timing of it was, it was a fly on the wall conversation about two women in their 20s navigating their sex life and their self-esteem, that directly corresponds with your sexual and romantic endeavors. And so we just talked as if we were the only ones in the room. And I think when you do something groundbreaking, you never set out to be groundbreaking. You just want to be honest. And so that was the mentality that we had with it. And it struck a chord immediately. And the cool thing was people started writing us and asking us questions. And then they started sharing things, really intense situations that have happened in their life, a lot of them being traumatic, that they kind of added this caveat of, I've never told anybody these things. And we're like, wow, we're really hitting on something. Like sharing your life makes people introspective and they want to share their life with you, which is a big honor.
It's a big honor. And do you feel like in a lot of ways your show has empowered women?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sexually,
Sexually and with self-esteem. My comedy partner is pretty much the only person I've ever met that has 100% self-esteem. She just was nurtured in a very beautiful way by her parents.
I don't think I've ever met anyone like that.
I haven't either. And so the irony is I had a very traumatic childhood. Yeah. She did not. Her childhood was beautiful and her individuality was really encouraged by her parents. And so as we got older and are in the world now, we are in the public eye, she was more traumatized by other people's behavior because she grew up in this beautiful, surrounded by like love and understanding. And I'm like, oh, I already knew the world was fucked up, so I'm ready to go.
You already knew the world was fucked up. You learned that at a very young age, right?
Very young age, yeah.
And in psychology, and you're very interested in psychology.
Oh my gosh, obsessed.
I almost feel like the need to justify why you're here on this podcast, but like you are an extremely interesting case study, as well as a highly creative person. And you're really interested in psychology, so I knew we would have a million things to geek out on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So in psychology, there's this theory that our early childhood is like a weather forecast. So what if there's a lot of unpredictability and harshness in our environment, our brain kind of wires in a way where that's what we expect forevermore for the rest of our life. And that can be very hard to unlearn.
Yeah, because then you project it onto everybody in your life. And they're like, what's your problem? And you're like, well, what is my problem? Shit.
Because that's what your brain's a prediction machine.
Yeah.
And so at very young, do you feel like personally young and early in your life, your brain kind of started to predict something about the world?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I my mother was mentally ill and we never knew which mom we were going to get. My dad had a pretty bad temper. And also too, spanking fucks a kid up. Like being hit by a parent, it was so accepted when I was a kid. So my parents were certainly not the only ones. Every kid in my neighborhood got spanked by their parents. But as I got older, I'm like, that's messed up. To be like the trauma therapist that I worked with for a long time, she goes, when you're a little kid, your parents are 100 feet tall. They're like God to you. Yeah. And so when that type of person who holds that spot in your life strikes you physically, it's so confusing, even though it was like an accepted form of discipline at the time. So there's so much that one could do to mess up their kid.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But so what else in your childhood that you feel comfortable talking about makes you who you are today?
Oh, I'll talk about all of it.
Yeah.
The way I summarize my relationship with my mother is I don't talk to either of my parents. I went no contact, which is really, I think people go one way or another when they have a messed up childhood. They either know it's messed up or they work really hard at convincing themselves that everything's great. And if something happens that upsets you, it's my fault. You internalize it, right? And so I internalized it. And I didn't realize things were awry until a couple years ago. It was really recent, and my world crumbled for about a year and a half. I would wake up scream crying. I was just so very suicidal. Wow. But how I describe my childhood is my mom used, especially my teen years, suicide as a manipulation tactic. And I didn't know it was manipulation.
It's very common among people with borderline personality disorder.
I do think when I started learning about borderline, I was like, that's what that is.
It's a very common tactic used to gain attention. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And my whole family functioned around my mom's mood. And so I remember like my brother, I have an older brother who I love so much. He's like my war veteran buddy, And
so you didn't disown him?
No, I love him. He's thank God I have him as my brother.
Yeah.
But I remember all of his girlfriends throughout the years they were always like, "What's up with you guys and your mom?" I'm like, "Don't talk about my mom that way." But I would defend her because I thought she was my best friend and all this stuff. And so now I'm at a place that was really difficult to get to where I love her and I want the best for her. I want her to be so happy. I'm so glad she was my mother because it made me the person I am. But my inner peace would be compromised if she was in my life.
Yeah. And there's another reason why you kind of stopped talking to them, because you were a sperm. You found out you found a surprise with 23andMe. What was that?
Yeah. So my mom was adopted when she was about 3, and her biological mother was so much more mentally ill than she was, which is usually how it goes. And she got adopted by a lovely family, but we never knew much about her biological side. We knew we had some things from the social paperwork she had from her adoption, but I got her a 23andMe kit for Christmas one year because I was like, we don't know anything about your DNA, so this will be really exciting. She didn't want to do it, so I was like, that was weird. So I took the kit and did it. I got all these results. I found out I'm 51% Ashkenazi Jewish. I was like, oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Wait, that's greater than chance.
Yeah. My dad wasn't Jewish, so I was like, oh, Mom, we're Jewish. And she goes, oh, okay. I'm like, that's a weird reaction. And I started getting messages from women that were like, "Oh, we're half siblings. Do you know your dad?"
From 23andMe, they messaged you? Yeah.
Because I clicked the option where if do you want a DNA relative to be able to contact you? And I said sure, because my mom had siblings.
I get like 10th cousins messaging me on there.
Yeah.
Like, hit me up for money.
Yeah, wow, that's not good.
I'm like, we're not that related.
Yeah, I don't know you that well. And then I called her.
Yeah.
And I taped it because when anything potentially terrible happens to a comedian, we're like, how are we gonna make this funny? So I thought it was a joke. There was like, there's no way my dad's not my dad, so I'm gonna find out what's up. But as a joke, I filmed it and I was like, I'm about to find out my family's not my family.
Amazing.
And then I asked her, I told her about the messages, and I go, is dad my biological dad? Obviously he's my real dad because he raised me. But she was hesitant, and I go, what? And I go, I'm not a sperm donor, baby, am I? And she goes, and I'm still not mad about that part. I think it's very disrespectful that they didn't tell me. I'm mad about all the other stuff. Honestly, I'm like, I feel like you guys went through great lengths to get me here. It's something to be ashamed about, but I get why you didn't tell me. It wasn't the right choice, but I understand. Yeah. The thing that upset me is you saw me take the DNA kit home.
Yeah.
That was your chance to have an honest conversation with me.
100%.
And you allowed me to find out this way.
Wow. That shakes up your world.
It's wild. And I call my brother because their first thing to me was don't tell anybody, which I thought is very unfair.
Yeah.
It's my experience. It's also their experience, but it's mine too. And
did he know?
My brother had no idea.
So this shocked him too.
Yeah, my whole life.
What's his situation?
He's biologically both of my parents, but my whole life he told me I was the mailman's baby. Because I don't look like anybody in my family. My mom has curly hair and I have curly hair, but my sperm donor is Jewish. He's the Jewish one. Has like a Jew fro. I'm like, oh, that's where my hair comes from.
You met him?
No, he passed away.
You saw a picture of him?
I did see. There's one picture of him that I saw that I was like, I don't look anything like him either.
Can we put the picture of him up on the? No,
we could. He did die. He died by suicide. He died by suicide. Wow. And that was an interesting thing to learn because my mother had kind of dangled suicide over me, her own suicide, potential suicide, over me for so long. And that was that was like a poetic realization. I'm like, whoa, that's wild.
Oh my God. There's so many layers of, I don't even know what the word is, irony or.
It's all of it.
Holy shit.
It's all, and I didn't process this for a year because I was just like, what? I just didn't know how to react. I didn't know, but people were telling me how to react, and I was trying to be mindful of like, don't react in a certain way because people are telling you should be mad. I'm honestly not mad about that.
Yeah.
I think it's cool. I think it's a really unique experience to find out one of your parents is not biologically your parent.
It's an experience.
It is.
It's a unique experience to go through in life to discover that everything you thought you knew about your life is actually not true.
It's wild.
Not everyone gets to experience that.
Yeah.
So in terms of, it's going to get just to comedy, were you always funny naturally? Did you start to use it as a defense mechanism? I wasn't one of those people that used it as a defense mechanism, but I was the most joyful when everybody around me was laughing. Mm-hmm. And especially my mom, because it was just, we never knew the mood she was going to be in. When my mom and dad and me and my brother were all together laughing, the most blissful moments of my life, where even as a child, I knew enough to know in that moment, like, this is beautiful and I only want this. And so I was always chasing that. Yeah, there's a high there. I mean, that's why people go into lots of different these related fields, like entertainment, like rock musicians. And I think comedians, like you both kind of have this dopamine reward when you get immediate real time. Because there's something special about real time feedback, right? It's like depressing being a scientist and going through a peer review where everyone tells you suck. And then you have a year before the paper even comes out after it's accepted. And then when it comes out, you get maybe positive feedback from like one person. Maybe one person reads your paper. So I'm just like, I can see how there's a real appeal there to be able to get real-time feedback. But at the same time, do you think there's a certain personality that it almost sort of needs that real-time feedback. Like, is there a need there that's being fulfilled?
Yeah, I think every person on the planet really enjoys immediate gratification. But that's why social media is huge. The posting a picture of yourself or doing something and then getting like rewarded for it is a high, and you could see the people that get real high off of that, and I'm certainly one of them. But yeah, there's definitely it's so rewarding to connect with a group of strangers, and it's also really nice. I've been doing it for over a decade, so I'm super comfortable with it.
Yeah.
I can ride the wave. I can annihilate a 20-minute set or an hour set, and it's such a huge accomplishment, and it's really exciting. But it's also really nice that like people come together, they pay and arrange their lives so that they can be in a room with other strangers to laugh. That is amazing to me.
I love comedy. I mean, I even took a course in Santa Monica and performed under an alter ego.
That's fun.
Yeah.
You're Sasha Fierce. That's Beyonce's alter ego.
Oh yeah. I could say the name of my alter ego, but I don't want people Googling the set. But
I hear you.
It's pretty. He's pretty perverted.
That's fine.
The alter ego. But I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Like I think that if I didn't do this job, I probably would pursue stand-up comedy.
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. It's just it allows you to really kind of just like be naked, in front of people and just be like, this is me.
Yeah.
And I also noticed there's a tinge of self-deprecation to almost every comedian I've watched. It's an interesting phenomenon. I've wanted to discuss this with a fellow comedian. Listen to me. As a fellow comedian.
You're already one of us.
Yeah, right. Listen to me. With a comedian. There is that kind of, I watched once a really strikingly handsome man do comedy, and he wasn't funny. There was something about, like, kind of, and also he came out with this kind of, like, I'm the best attitude. And that combination, no one, like, people are like, you're not a comedian.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's like this implicit thing that to be funny, you have to almost kind of be relatable. Am I making sense?
You have to be relatable. And self-deprecation is, I think it's super healthy.
Yeah.
And it's a way to kind of gain control of yourself. And it's a way to accept the things about you while making fun of them at the same time. It's so cathartic. Yeah. I have so many things to be self-deprecating about. Yeah. And it's really, one of my favorite things in comedy is getting roasted.
Yes.
And I'm so sensitive. Oh my God.
Have you been roasted? Have you had one of your Comedy Central roasts yet?
I'm not a Comedy Central roast, but in smaller versions of that. But I love it. It's so, that's probably the most catharsis I've ever received on stage is getting absolutely annihilated. My character, my look, everything. Yeah. Because it's like, oh, this doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's all fun.
Yeah, there is a great humility there. But there's also like, there's a fragility there I see amongst comedians as well, right? It's sort of like, like if no one's laughing, it's almost like, why the fuck are you laughing?
Oh, yeah. And you have to really restrain.
Like you get, internally I can see it and upset, like they're upset. Like, like, why are you not laughing at me right now?
That's a newbie usually. That's usually a sign of a newbie.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, because bombing ruined me for about 7 years. I remember one time the manager that I have now, before we worked together, he got me a set at Caroline's on Broadway, which was a huge club. And I bombed so hard. I didn't talk for 2 days. I left the comedy club, didn't talk. I just didn't say any words. And comics get immediate gratification, but we also get immediate dissatisfaction. Like, and when you bomb, you're like, wow, you don't like what I said or how I said it or who I am.
Well, it's almost like you take it so personally that it's like you don't like who I am.
Yep.
There's like the comedy and who you are so intertwined.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it is really vulnerable putting yourself out there like that. And so I think I want to just validate you for a second in that experience. I'm such a psychologist, aren't I? But it's an incredibly vulnerable thing to go out there and be naked. And I don't think audiences really, if they're heckling especially, like they don't get, like that's a human on the stage there who literally put themselves out there and been like, I'm going to just say the most intimate things about my life and share things, So yeah, it's no, I get it. I can get that why that would be incredibly upsetting.
Yeah, but then you do it for enough time and you're like, oh, come at me, bro.
And that's the beautiful thing, right? When you can handle that kind of rejection. I recently took up a hobby of magic. Maybe I'll do some magic on you later. Yeah. But I set up a shop. I set up a table in Santa Monica on the beach path.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I started to enjoy the rejection. It's good practice.
Yes.
It's like, I'd be like, hey, do you want a free magic show? No, I'm good. It's like,
you don't want to see my magic?
See my magic?
Okay.
I feel like a total loser just sitting there in a little booth.
But you live through that moment and you're like,
100%. I filmed all the rejections and I made a reel of all the rejections because they're funny.
Yeah.
But so I think it's like it's great to be able to learn that muscle.
Yeah. And I have abandonment issues. And so being abandoned by a group of strangers and getting through that and proving to yourself you're proving yourself you're not going to die, you're not a bad person, but I had to go through years of tears to build the strength, but the strength that it gives you is huge.
Good on you. I mean, for someone with abandonment issues, doing comedy is, I'm trying to think of a funny analogy, but you can think of a funny analogy that it's like someone who is scared. I don't know, what do you think of something like that?
Yeah, but somebody who's allergic to cats is a zookeeper.
Thank you.
For tigers.
That's I needed a comedian on the spot to come up with, but I knew that you were thinking the same thing I was thinking. So good on you. I really do want to talk about the psychology of relationships, the psychology of sexuality. I have a whole bunch of questions relating to the sexuality domain, but let's talk about relationships for a second. Personally, how's that played out for you?
Oh, so bad. So when I'm realizing this, hindsight, 2020, and especially learning about trauma and the brain, trauma.
We can talk about that too, yeah.
Trauma makes you behave in ways, made me behave in ways that I was really ashamed of.
Yeah.
And I just blamed myself because I didn't understand the neuroscience of trauma. I didn't understand that your brain looks different in a brain scan when you've been traumatized. Like you're fight or flight. There's nothing wrong with you. Your body's actually working correctly. And so that was really interesting. So my relationships, when someone would give me I think when you are neglected as a kid and kind of emotionally abused, when someone gives you attention, it feels so good. And you're like, oh my God, this is what it feels like to be seen, that you don't even qualify. Is this person good? Are we compatible emotionally, intellectually? You skip all that stuff because it's such a high. It's like heroin. And so you'll do anything to not let that go because you've never experienced that before. So I think when you grow up with an unstable family life, your relationship life is kind of set up to fail in a way. It's not necessarily true, but for me it was. And so a lot of mind games and manipulations with my first boyfriend. And so out of revenge, he cheated on me, which everyone told me he was. I'm like, no, he loves me. And he was cheating on me. And as revenge, I was like, I'm going to date your bassist. And I did. Lovely man. We dated for 3 years. He was so sweet. I've never dated somebody who's sweet before. But then after that, I was bad again. So the relationship I'm in now is the most beautiful, rewarding relationship ever.
Oh, wonderful.
We started out we started out kind of toxic, but I greatly contributed to that dynamic because I was projecting him hurting me, and I didn't realize I was doing that. And I think anybody can sense, like an audience can sense when a comic's desperate for you to like them. I just kind of projected these insecurities. And then I also was so desperate for him not to go anywhere. And he was like, I gotta go. And so his body was reacting in a healthy way. So, but we've come to a place where it's so beautiful, and we're like little kids when we're together, and we've carved out a really safe space for each other. And so I realized, like,
I love this for you.
Thank you. I do too. And his inner little kid comes out when we're together. My little inner kid comes out, and it's safe. And so that's very rare for me. So, but my friendships were really, there was the year that I stopped talking to my parents, I also blocked them, which is crazy. But
on social media, you mean? Or your phone?
Okay. Yeah, social media, but also the phone number. Gotcha. Like, I do a bit about it where I'm like, before I press block, I was like, am I allowed to do this? Because I was so up their ass that it was just unheard of.
I know.
But I stopped talking to them. I stopped talking to my best friend of 15 years.
Wow.
She had borderline, and it was just reliving the mom thing.
Did your mom have borderline? Because I literally diagnosed her with
it.
I don't know your mom at all.
So knowing everything I know about borderline, I've read so many books about it. I'm like, okay, 100%. It's just she always thinks we're out to get her. Yeah, you nailed it. And she always, it's so frustrating. And I would get triggered by my best friend at the time too, because she would behave in the same way. So I realized that I was just you recreate the dynamic until you overcome the dynamic.
Absolutely. And all caveats aside, we don't mean to stigmatize people with borderline.
Right.
There are plenty of people with borderline who are perfectly wonderful people to hang around.
Or self-actualized,
100%. But there are people who don't do the work, right? And that's kind of what we're focusing on right now.
You know, I try. I don't want to like diagnose my mother because I don't know, but I have a joke when I try to talk about her mental illness on stage. I'm still trying to find ways so that the audience isn't like, oh, that's sad. I'm like, oh, really? Fuck. But there is one joke that works every time. Yeah. And I'm like, I always thought it was my problem. Like growing up, I'm like, why am I so dumb? Because our relationship was so fraught. Yeah. And I was in a bookstore one day and I passed by a book. The real title of the book was "You're Not Crazy, It's Your Mother." Yeah. And I was like, I wonder what that book has to say. And I read the book front to back in 3 days, and I learned about narcissistic personality disorder, is what I say in the joke. And I'm like, I call my brother in the middle of the night. I'm like, DJ, Mom's not bipolar. She's a bitch. Can't unknow that. Yeah. But narcissism is, like people, I thought narcissism was being full of yourself. That's not what it is. Like it is controlling, and there's various types, but like if how dare you upset me? How dare, like that was kind of the attitude I was met with by my mom and kind of my dad.
Well, usually with borderline, you tend to find high levels of what's called vulnerable narcissism, which is sort of like, because I've suffered, I'm entitled to everything around me. It's not a because I'm superior to others, I'm entitled. It's because I am fragile and and no one seems to understand what I'm going through. And usually that's correlated with a victim mindset. Mm-hmm. So like we call it a perpetual victim mindset. Of course, some of us are victimized, and it's quite right to acknowledge that. But we're talking about a perpetual, where was your mother kind of the victim of every kind of situation, and your own needs?
What needs?
Yeah.
I felt I despised my needs.
Yeah.
I despised if I needed help with anything. I despised needing guidance, that hurt me.
So how did you learn to trust yourself? Because in that kind of situation, a lot of people grow up and they kind of describe it as like, I feel like I have no bottom, no center, no center of being. Yeah. I don't know who I am. Did you ever go through that period of that?
Oh my God. About 5 years of, I didn't know who I was the whole time. Yeah. And that was jarring because you're like, was this all, I was just putting on a mask? Fuck. And then you have to do the hard work of excavating yourself from the rubble. But I would cry in my therapist's office so often. I'm like, I don't know who I am. And she's like, that makes sense. Of course you don't know who you are. You've been told who you are by your family. Yeah. They tell you who, and instead of going, no, that's not me, that's somebody with a sense of self would do, you bought into it because you wanted to be loved by them. That's survival. So these mechanisms were in place to keep you alive. Yeah. But I am just now getting to know myself.
Oh,
the past year.
Better late than never.
Oh yeah.
So who are you?
Oh, I am so curious. I'm one of the most curious people I know. Yeah. I believe in magic. I believe in aliens and ghosts and the transformative power of psychedelic drugs. And I believe that life can be fun all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
You left something out. You're also into extreme weather.
I love tornadoes.
I know.
They're incredible. I want to do it. I missed out on it this season because the spring is almost done. But you can do tornado chasing with storm chasers.
That's so cool.
Being in front of a tornado, like seeing, I used to live in Virginia. So
you grew up in front of a tornado with your mother.
Yeah, that's
emotional
true.
An emotional term.
Yeah, Doc.
Michael's laughing at that one.
You're very correct. Mm-hmm. But there's something so awe-inspiring and humbling. Nature is so humbling, and it's so necessary. And I believe plants are sentient. There's all these experiments about this one guy did an experiment that I learned in a workshop with Laura Lynn Jackson, who's a renowned psychic medium. I'm obsessed with her. Where they hooked plants up to an EKG. The scientist, left his studio and had a timer set where he found this animal. He wanted to find an animal that only lives a couple days. And there's a certain shrimp at the bottom of a river that only live about a day or two. So he didn't feel bad killing them. So he dumped them once the timer went off. He got out of his studio because he didn't want to affect it. He dumped the shrimp into boiling hot water, and the EKG on the plants was going nuts. And so there you go. Plants are sentient. And I think that is the most interesting, beautiful facet of life.
Well, we do discuss in this podcast different theories of consciousness, and I do feel like we've opened up 50 different threads at once and haven't closed any, but
that's my MO. Sorry.
Narcissism, borderline. Let's talk about consciousness.
Plants feel,
What do you say?
Plants feel,
Plants feel, Well, but there is a certain theory of consciousness, that consciousness is fundamental, that it's, it's more that we are tapping into a universal consciousness. It's not like we have our own consciousness that is completely circumscribed in our brain, right? So there are some really interesting theories that do leave open real scientific possibilities for everything to sort of have a certain level of consciousness, all, biological organisms, and whether or not plants are conscious, I think it's still open for really legitimate scientific debate and discussion. So, yeah.
But can narcissism be cured?
The narcissism and the extent to which it can change really depends on what kind of narcissism you have. So if you score really high in what's called grandiose narcissism, which is like that's like the braggadocio kind of narcissist, like the Kanye West, I'm God. I'm literally, I'm Jesus or whatever. If you believe you're Jesus, it turns out those people, it's very hard to change them.
Yeah.
This is coming from Scott Barry Kaufman, who's like a humanistic psychologist. I believe in the fundamental potential for growth for everyone. But with that said, the ones that end up in clinical therapy either tend to be the grandiose narcissists who've been forced to be there by their girlfriends. Or this is a fact.
Yeah, I believe it.
These are the only two types of narcissists you will see in a clinician's couch.
Oh,
is the one that the grandiose narcissist who's been forced, and really doesn't change at all.
Yeah,
they're resentful that they have to be there, or the vulnerable narcissist who has reached a point of depression and anxiety, because you do tend to find anxiety and depression quite high in those who score high in vulnerable narcissism. We've done work on this. We've written a paper on the clinical correlates of different types of narcissism. So we know that the real big vulnerable one is vulnerable narcissism, because if you're not getting that attention and validation, because you kind of feel broken inside. A lot of people who score in vulnerable narcissism, they don't feel they're superior at all. They feel like they are fundamentally worthless.
Yeah.
I call it the entitlement paradox. I coined that.
Love that.
Do you like that?
Love that.
Entitlement paradox? Do you like the phrase?
No, it's great.
Because on the one hand, you feel like, okay, Greg Giraldo, the comedian Giraldo?
We share the same manager.
Amazing.
Yeah.
May he rest in peace.
Yeah, he was a great
comedian.
Mind. Yeah.
I have a quote from him in my new book. I'm writing a book about vulnerable narcissism, and
cool.
I have a quote from him. He says, "My whole life I've felt like a piece of shit at the center of the universe." And I think that perfectly encapsulates the vulnerable narcissism kind of mentality, as well as a lot of comedians, I think, feel that way. Do you resonate with that?
Yeah. I'm so self-aware because of the years of work that when I get into the victim mentality, I know it right away. And I go, we're doing the victim thing again. Let's not do this dance.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It's great. One other thing, a theory that I've kind of come up with that I'm curious of your thoughts about narcissism and borderline. Not things like sociopathy, because I have friends who are teachers who teach like 3-year-olds, and they're like, no, you could straight up be born a sociopath. I've seen it. And they've told me stories. I'm like, okay, yep, you can.
There's a particular phrase for that, because you don't label those kids little psychopaths. It's called like impulsive avoiding.
Yeah, sure. There's but I can say that you can.
Okay.
But borderline and narcissism is a response.
Because we don't want a self-fulfilling prophecy with these kids. Is that why I say that? Yeah.
Right.
You start calling them little shits.
Yeah, no, fine, I'm going to behave. It's like if you think your boyfriend's cheating and you keep asking him, he's like, well, now I'm going to.
If you put a label psychopath on a 3-year-old, they will grow up to be a psychopath.
Sure. But borderline and narcissism are a response to an event or to being treated a certain way, right?
Oh, well, everything's a nature-nurture mix. Everything. Yeah. So you can't put some things in a box that's like purely socialization and not genes and say those are just purely genes and not everything, actually.
Would you argue narcissism is genetic? Can it be genetic?
Everything, including narcissism, 100%. There's a genetic basis to it. Everything, including your introversion, extroversion, your you can go down the list of all your personality traits, whether or not you're open to new experiences or not. They all have a genetic basis, which just simply means a temperament. You know that you certainly you can acknowledge that there's a continuity of temperament you've had your whole life, even though you learn and grow and all that.
Yes,
even though you've been on this amazing journey, there's still a temperament. There's still like an inner core to you.
Yeah.
And narcissism is true. It shows itself very early.
Really?
Yeah. Some of these clusters of traits tend to show themselves very early in life and can be amplified by the environment.
If you are raising a child and you see signs of narcissism in your child, can you steer them in the other direction?
You can. I really do think you can through nurturing and real firm parenting.
Yeah, and showing them, like, I think proving to them how good it feels to connect with people and how good it feels to, like, you know, my girlfriends and I, we always just pump each other up. We're like, yeah, bitch, you're doing it, babe. Like, that feels so good. And when you
I want to be one of your girlfriends.
Yeah.
How do I sign up for that?
No, but my group of friends are amazing, badass people.
I believe
like
it.
Truly, one of the biggest modalities of healing that I've engaged in for myself is getting a group of friends that see me and hear me and go, you're being a little psycho today, but hey, girl, sometimes you're psycho. Like, it's okay. Like,
I have my friends like that too, and
the best.
You got to treasure it. But psychopathy is an interesting one because you can have the brain of a psychopath and not develop any outward behaviors that are bad or immoral because you had a really caring, nurturing family that you grew up in. It's the combination that's particularly bad.
Can I ask you another psychology question?
Ask me anything.
This is something that's
This is the Psychology Podcast.
Okay, perfect. I'm so glad I'm here because I don't have a therapist right now.
By the way, this is the chill pill, and you can have this at any point if you want.
Thank you. So doing Guys We Fucked for 10 years, getting all the emails from people.
Yeah.
I almost felt a little silly for being naive to this, but we just get we probably have hundreds of thousands of emails. That's not an exaggeration.
Wow.
I exaggerate everything. From people who were raped or from people who were abused as children, sexually abused. Pedophilia fascinates me because I can look at the people I know in my life. 80% of them were affected by pedophilia. It is so rampant.
What? 80%?
Yeah. They either
That's
somebody they have a pedophile in their family.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that's higher
so
than the
high.
baseline of the population. But
It's crazy high.
Wow.
To the point where I'm like, this is wild. And so it's been happening for a long time in the history of humanity.
It was normalized in the Greek era.
Right.
I mean, you viewed a little boy, the status, social status.
Yeah. And like, Alice in Wonderland, that's one of my favorite books. But the Lewis Carroll was a pedophile. Like, he was in love with Alice and she was 5.
I didn't even know that, honestly. You just ruined my whole childhood.
Sorry. Well, no, I didn't know that when I fell in love with Alice in Wonderland. And I was, talk about holding opposites, right?
I didn't know. It was like, tell me Santa Claus.
I know. Sorry. But you can still enjoy it.
You ruined it for me.
Well, my brain isn't a trauma brain anymore, so it's not black or white. It's not you're either good or bad.
I know.
So I can hold that, like, somebody can write this beautiful book and also be a pedophile. But I'm like, this is such a rampant thing. And it's so interesting. I think one of the reasons why it's so rampant is because everybody's so scared to talk about it. And I find that very interesting, given that so many people in my life are affected by it, right?
Well, I'm really sorry that many people in your life have been affected by it. I didn't. That's very high. I have noticed a very high number of comedians joke about pedophilia. It just happened the other day. I went to this naked comedy show I was telling you about. That's the first time I've ever been to such a comedy show, and I thought they were so brave to go.
Oh my gosh.
I was like,
I'm not that brave.
I admire them, but the pedophilia, that was a topic that's just like, it seems to be something. It seems to be like we use humor in a way to really process and. What is it? You can explain it to me.
Well, and you look at the psychology of a joke that's like kind of like a joke that's edgier. From a comedic standpoint, from a writing standpoint, the victim of whatever you're talking about can never be the butt of the joke. That's just because that it's not, and that's why people get pissed off. Comedians will get canceled, but if you zoom out from the canceling and the politicizing, you go, it's not funny when you're just kicking someone when they're down, right?
Yeah.
But when you are the victim of something really tragic and you make a joke and you put the perpetrator in their place in a way that makes other people feel validated who've been through that, it's the most healing thing I could think of.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Hurt people is kind of bullshit because
most of the cases, no.
I was hurt, and I mean, of course, we're all going to hurt people in our lives, but nowhere near the damage that was done to me because being hurt made me feel so bad. I would never want to.
So that's a myth. The hurt people thing is a myth. Most people. There are a lot of myths about like trauma, and I'm actually writing a whole book on this right now.
That's great because the Instagram community, trauma influencers.
I know.
There's some really amazing
trauma
ones.
is such a shit show.
It's like it's not an excuse for you to be a piece of shit.
Well, that's the main thesis of my book. Yeah.
Good. That's a book that's very much needed.
Thank you. I can't wait to share it with you.
Yeah.
Not because you. I think you'll enjoy this, but I mean, everything is a combination of nature and nurture, right? So, I mean, I think there are certain, genes contribute to urges, just like there's genes for alcohol urges, right? Like, but look at all these people who overcome all sorts of tendencies and urges they have for, those who are predisposed genetically towards alcohol tend to have family who were addicts. No shit, you're getting their genes.
You have it genetically, and you have a model for you.
And you're getting the environment as well. If you get both the genes and the environment, that can be really tough. But the hurt people thing, I think most people who have been through terrible things tend to develop a greater empathy and sensitivity. Usually the siblings of those who have the full-blown illness tend to have a watered-down version of it that is more caring and empathetic. Mm-hmm. And you see that with creativity as well. I've studied the mental illness linked to creativity. For 20 years I've studied that topic, published neuroscience papers on it. And you do find that children, descendants of those who had a full-blown mental illness, particularly schizophrenia.
That's a rough one.
Yeah. But the children get a watered-down version called schizotypy, which is a personality trait. It's like schizophrenia light.
Oh, that sounds fun. He's just kooky.
I got a little of that myself, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Schizophrenia is no joke, man.
I don't have schizophrenia, but schizotypy. Schizotypy, I think, has really fueled my creativity and imagination.
Yeah, because you can be goofy, you could be a little off, which I love people that are a little off.
It's correlated with imagination as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I have a really rich imagination. That's schizophrenia at full-blown cases, your imagination's so great that you can't differentiate. But if you have it light, then that means that's kind of fun. I can go through, I can go into like a real fantasy world and be able to know that it's fantasy.
Yes. Yeah. And get yourself out of it.
Yeah.
So Laura Lynn Jackson was talking about earlier, she has 2 books that are just amazing. I was introduced to her from the Netflix docuseries Surviving Death. That show changed my life. And got me on the wormholes that I'll be on for the rest of my life. But I've taken a lot of workshops with her. I've seen her do readings. She integrates a lot of science into her abilities. She's had EKGs while she's giving a reading, and her brain scan reads as if she's in a coma while she's reading, which is really interesting.
Wow.
And she co-taught this workshop that, they shared one thing I would love to see what you think of this. But she said schizophrenia, this is her spiritual explanation, so we'll never know. But she's like, when we're born, we're spirits incarnating in a body. We have to like lower our vibration to be in a body because the earth is just a very low, heavy, dense energy. But with schizophrenia, a lot of times when people are born schizophrenic, we all are born with a dunce cap that kind of caps all of this universal knowledge. Because if we had it all at the same time, we would be completely overwhelmed. Our nervous system would be fucked. With schizophrenia, the dunce cap's tipped a little bit and stuff's getting it, and it's just extreme overwhelming of the nervous system.
Well, that's actually really scientifically accurate.
Yeah.
It's called reduced latent inhibition. That's tell her the technical term.
I'll let her know you said that.
Yeah.
I'm seeing her in a couple weeks.
My whole dissertation was about, not my whole, but a big part of my PhD dissertation was on the link between reduced latent inhibition and creativity. And it turns out that those with full-blown schizophrenic episodes, their latent inhibition is so low that they really can't filter out things that they should be filtering out as irrelevant. So there's lots of things in our environment that are relevant to the goal that we have in our mind. But people with schizophrenia, they find meaning in everything. Everything becomes relevant. So that thing's talking to me over there suddenly. It's relevant.
Yeah.
That Corona is Corona. Why are you looking at me like that? do you know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
But you're kind of drowning in meaning.
Oh,
I never quite put it that way.
Right.
But there is beauty in finding greater meaning. So if you can lower the dial, basically don't throw the baby out the bathwater is what I'm saying. I don't like stigmatizing people, right?
No, and with schizophrenics, a lot of the ones that I've met, I'm like, you're sweet and kind, and
totally.
God, I bet you would write a killer script if you could just
dial
shut
it
the voices
down
off for a second.
What we want to help them do is not become someone else. But we want to dial that down a little bit, let them be able to ground themselves in reality. It's called reality monitoring. They suck at reality monitoring.
Yeah.
But if we can help them with that, then they can still keep their rich imagination. They get to keep, seeing life with a sense of meaning, because being able to infuse your life with such meaning can be a source of transcendence, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah. And we're the only creatures on the planet out of all the animals that need meaning the way that we do.
Yeah.
Another fascinating thing that I'll remember until I die that I learned in this exact workshop. She co-taught it, like I said, with a scientist. I have his name in my email if you're interested. But I'm like, this is worthy of looking into on a large scale. They did a study of nonverbal autistic children, and they showed video footage from their study. This woman had 3 kids. One of them was nonverbal autistic. They taught that son a communication method with it was a piece of paper that looked like a keyboard, and he could spell out words, so he could totally communicate. He was super smart, very funny, like his personality came out once they had this. And her youngest son, he's neurotypical, right, is the word. She goes, Mommy, I forget what the autistic child's name was, but let's say Dan. If you go upstairs on the 3rd floor of our house and write a word on a piece of paper, Dan will tell you what the word is. He's like psychic. And she's like, what? So she did it. She went upstairs, or he said, if you say a word. She was like, okay, this is weird. So she went upstairs and wrote a word on a piece of paper, came down to her nonverbal autistic son in the kitchen, and he told her exactly what the word was. And they from there did this study where they tested it wasn't psychic abilities, but they're so sensitive. Nonverbal autistic people have such a beautiful sensitivity. Yeah. And I'm like, whoa. They can pick up what you say. That is mind-blowing. Yeah. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about it?
Oh, yeah. I do quite an amount of work with twice exceptional kids who are gifted and autistic. Okay. Scientific director of Bridges Academy, which is a special school for kids who are twice exceptional. Wow. And these twice exceptional kids are extraordinary in they hold together paradoxes that society tends to treat people. You're either gifted or you're learning disabled. Yeah. But a lot of these kids are just so not just sensitive, but just so brilliant. At connecting dots and seeing patterns. Pattern detection seems to be a real a big plus from autism. Yeah.
I think autistic people could save the world, actually. Yeah. And I'm like, look, can we all not sleep on that? Like, let's look into this more and figure out how to empower
I don't know
people.
how you feel about Elon Musk, but he's certainly on that autism spectrum.
Yeah,
and,
he is a brilliant
He's
guy.
done a lot for this world, right?
Yeah.
And Zuckerberg, is openly autistic.
Oh, is he? I didn't know that.
I think so.
It makes sense. Not to diagnose people, but yeah.
And then there are plenty of women who are on the autism spectrum, but they have shame over it because it's not as accepted if you're a woman, and they mask a lot. And I think that's really sad that they feel as though they have to mask.
Yeah. I there was at one point in my life where someone was like, "Are you autistic, Krystyna?" I'm like, "Oh, I don't know." But then I looked at all these videos of me as a kid. And I would always flap my hands, and then someone was like, "I'm autistic," and that's the marker. I'm like, "Oh, okay." And then I tried to take an online test. I'm like, that's not the way to go. An online quiz.
Honestly, almost every comedian I've ever met, eventually, after talking to me, becomes convinced they're autistic.
Yeah.
Neil Brennan.
Yeah. But you could make a case. But he took a test, right?
We got him to a whole panel of things.
What is is there a marker for autism in terms because there's such variations of it, but is there one or two things that if you check off these things, the likelihood
it's more complicated. There's a lot of it's a big checklist. Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not just I would never mention it's thorough. Yeah. I would never just mention one or two things, But you are good at looking me in the eyes.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I don't get an autistic vibe from you for what that's worth. For what that's worth. I get a little neurotic.
Little?
Do you want to know what I get from you?
Yeah. Let's go. Roast me.
Do you know what I get from you? I get a little neurotic. I get a little insecure. but like immensely confident at the same time. I feel like you're a walking paradox.
That's accurate.
Yeah. Like you walk around like don't know which side is going to come out when, you know.
Nope.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah. But maybe a lot of that comes down to who you're with and whether or not you feel comfortable. You know, I feel like if you don't feel comfortable around someone, you probably like shut down.
Oh yeah, I'm a totally different person.
Yeah. That's my prediction about you.
Yeah, no, that's accurate.
Yeah. It's been such a delight talking to you today. And I know we don't have much more time. There's just one more thing I want to bring up because I've been really enjoying watching your stand-up.
Thank you.
And I feel like there's a lot of psychology. I really recommend people watch you who are interested in psychology because you bring up a lot of psychological insights.
Ooh.
That just off the cuff, like you don't realize it, but you're like, I'm like, she nailed it, you know?
Cool.
This one I thought you nailed it. You talked about how are boys and girls, how are they raised differently, right?
Yeah.
And then you made this joke about how the wires got crossed.
Oh, yes.
It kind of points to the socialization processes we have as boys and girls. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the joke, I love this joke.
I love it too.
I really love it. I say...
You nailed it. You nailed it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I say, I talk about like I'm a straight woman, and if anybody in here thinks people could pick their sexuality, talk to the nearest straight lady. We wouldn't pick this. We're tired. And I talk about how I think it's a miracle that straight people get along, let alone find love, because we're raised to be such polar opposite people, even though we have so much in common. And I go, you have little boys growing up being told by the world, you can be mad, but you can't be sad, because that's chick shit. And then you have little girls growing up being told by the world, you could be sad and cry, but don't get mad, because that temper will scare everybody away.
So true.
And then as a result, you have these men walking around going, oh, I'm so sad. And these women are like, I'm so angry. What do I do? And the wires are crossed in your whole life. Yeah.
And that explains social media content, gendered content.
Yes.
100% perfectly.
Yeah, man.
all the the bros. You're not fooling anyone, bro.
Go to a drugstore and look at the deodorants. The man's deodorant is called Wolfthorn, and the woman's deodorant is Lilac.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, that's why I secretly want to be a comedian because like when I call out things like that, I get pounced on. I made a joke. I tried to make a joke on my Instagram about like most of Instagram are guys trying to convince each other that they're strong, like saying they're strong and women saying that they're worthy. Yeah.
Yes.
And I was like, that's basically what I'm seeing on my feed.
Yeah.
But I got in trouble from that.
Only good people cause trouble. You're like, and leading edge people cause trouble.
I like that.
Yeah. And also, it makes sense for you to be a comedian because you actually have a front row seat to the human condition.
I do. And it's absurd.
Yeah. And so you see the absurdity for your job under a microscope. And that's what comedians are trying to do. So you could live a double life. I think you should. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the Psychology Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
You were awesome.
Thanks. Yeah.